I've been trying to cover and do follow-up on the so-called cleanup at the Aliceville train wreck since it happened. This time I caught a ride with South Wings pilot Dick McLaughlin. We flew over the same area where I had recently flown with Tom Hutchings on November the 14th. Things have changed considerably since that first flight, but I can't say that it's cleaned up. In fact, it's a long way from being cleaned up. This flight was on the 22nd of January 2014, 11 weeks after the train wreck. There were still holes in the fences and oil inside and outside the containment. Even from the air, you could see the dark black streak along the railroad track of contaminated soil. This is what it looked like on the ground a couple of days later. Someone had been in within the last couple of days and replaced some of the boom and the little pom-poms, but they still weren't having much effect. I took advantage of one of these puddles to collect a sample of crude oil right out of the ground. No one had been to this site to do any kind of repairs or maintenance since late November. However, since the media has picked up on the story of the failure at this cleanup site, I have seen more activity in recent days. The railroad claimed early on that a beaver dam downstream of the railroad track was holding the oil back, but recently a contractor went in and dug those beaver dams out. All of the oil that was behind this beaver pond is probably somewhere in the Tombigbee waterway by now. Since these booms were installed sometime in mid to late November, no one had changed them until recently. There are some new booms and pom-poms in place, but they're having very little effect at containing the oil that's coming out of the ground now. It's my honest opinion that even this wouldn't have been done if it hadn't been for the media coverage of the terrific failure at this cleanup site. There are far better products on the market, such as Opflex for oil remover, than these polyester booms and pom-poms. They don't do much at holding the oil, as you can see. The oil that's weeping up out of the banks simply bypasses it and goes out into the pond. Once it gets into the wetland, there's nothing to stop it, as you can see from the holes in these fences. From start to finish, it doesn't look like any of this is doing much to stop the oil from going through the pond and downstream into Lubbock Creek. I refer to these polyethylene-looking things as pom-poms for lack of a better term. This last trip I may have been proven right. These things look like throwbacks from a Bama football game. At any rate, they're not doing much to control the flow of this oil. This is the stretch of railroad track that you can see from the air that has such a heavy black streak along the waterway. They use the oil-contaminated soil to rebuild the railroad. I used one of these sieves to get a sample in a jar. I thought this was oil floating on top of the water, but when I put the sample jar in there, I found out that this was pure Bakken crude coming straight out of the dirt. From here it enters the water and passes through the pom-poms and the booms and all of that stuff to get out into the wetland. All the way around the outside of the fences you can see soil saturated in Bakken crude. From this little place we were able to collect enough to get at least a full pint of pure Bakken crude out of the ground with no water in it. During the recent flyover, I saw 2 men on the ground and waders taking samples from this pond. No one can deny that they know the condition that this site's in. It's time that the EPA hold this railroad accountable for the full cost of this cleanup. And by cleanup, I mean using an effective product, maintaining it, and removing the oil from the water.